Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nick Harper and these are the headlines. NATO defence ministers meet in Brussels with a focus on the war in Ukraine and boosting Kiev's air defences after Russian air raids. Blaming the West for energy disruptions, Russian President Putin says the ball is in the EU's court on restarting Nord Stream deliveries. After accusing the US and Israel for inciting protests across Iran, the country's supreme leader calls protesters enemies as demonstrations over Mahsa Amini's death escalate. The IMF says soaring food and energy prices are raising the risk of social unrest, but attempting to tame costs through tax cuts, subsidies and price controls would be too costly. And Meta founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg lost over 119 million Facebook followers temporarily, bringing his follower count to 10,000 due to a software bug. US President Joe Biden has vowed consequences for Saudi Arabia after last week's decision announced by the OPEC Plus group led by Riyadh that it would cut oil production despite Washington's strong objections.
OPEC made the decision to align their energy policy with Russia's war aims and against the American people, further underscores that reasoning to realign that relationship, to reevaluate that relationship with Saudi Arabia. We are reviewing where we are currently right now, and we'll be watching closely over the coming weeks and months as well, consulting with our allies and also with members of Congress.
National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said that Biden believes it's time to take another look at the relationship and make sure that it is serving our national security interests. The development comes a day after Senator Bob Menendez said that the US must immediately freeze all aspects of US cooperation with Saudi Arabia, including the sale of arms. On Tuesday, Senator Richard Blumenthal and California Representative Ro Khanna also introduced legislation that would immediately pause all US arms sales to Saudi Arabia for 1 year. This would also halt sales of spare and repair parts, support services and logistical support. For the last few weeks, US officials had been quietly trying to persuade its biggest Arab partner to nix the idea of a production cut. But Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has not been swayed. But it remains to be seen how far Biden is willing to go in showing his displeasure with the Saudis. Over a year ago, Biden came into office vowing to reassess the US relationship because of Saudi Arabia's human rights record. But a tough oil market seemingly forced him to pay a visit to the kingdom earlier this year. Well, for more on this, we're joined by our correspondent Susan Tarani, who's live in New York for us. Well, Susan, since tough talk from the Biden administration has been swirling around for the last couple of days, but all of this, is it likely to lead to any concrete action?
Yeah, you know, Nick, many analysts believe that while this really was a setback and humiliation for the Biden administration, the president himself, because he took that trip back in July to Saudi Arabia, and while he doesn't admit that it was for oil and he says it was for the betterment of relationships between Arab allies in the region, it was for oil. And the Saudis went ahead with what was to their best interest. And here we are right now. And despite all of this, we are in a midterm cycle. And so some believe that a lot of this is performative. It was an embarrassment for the Biden administration, but ultimately the measures that the Democrats are putting forth is very unlikely to have bipartisan support on Capitol Hill. And what they're doing right now is they're putting these measures forward on the one hand to say that well, they have to do something about something, but on the other hand to take the attention away on the fact that America could be energy independent if they open up energy refineries and the oil market here in the United States. America doesn't have to be dependent on Saudi oil or OPEC. OPEC worked to their own interests, and America can work to its own interests as well. So, that's the discussion that's happening here on this side. But to go ahead and really pull out U.S. troops from Saudi Arabia, weapons and defense capabilities, these are allies alliances that have been going on for decades, almost 70 years, and it's very unlikely that something like that would happen. And also, they've managed to really hit hurdles and bypass them time and again. And I think oil prices, and it's not just me, a lot of others believe that oil prices aren't going to be something that would really, merit these kind of changes. President Biden said that there will be some kind of change in policy, but it's very unlikely that it's going to be very drastic.
And Susan, we heard a moment ago about those legislation proposals to stop arms sales being announced by some lawmakers. How much support do such initiatives have at the moment? How much support are they likely to garner?
They do have support among the Democrats. On the one hand, there is that kind of Democratic push because of President Biden's pariah state announcement from the very beginning of his administration. And then you have the human rights aspect of Saudi Arabia. And then you have this OPEC announcement. Remember, it's not just the president. It's the Democratic Party in the midterm elections and gas prices here in the United States that really will ultimately have a hit. Because of this announcement, at least partially, on the one hand. But, Republicans aren't going to go along with this because ultimately, as I mentioned, there are other aspects and other avenues that America can really save itself. And it doesn't have to be reliant on OPEC. And I think that's the argument that many of them are going to bring to the table, as they have in recent days.
Thank you, Susan. We'll come back to you in a few minutes' time for our next story, which is looking at latest polling numbers for US President Joe Biden. His approval rating has stayed close to the lowest level of his presidency this week, further signalling bleak changes for his Democratic Party in the upcoming November 8th midterm election. The two-day national poll, carried out by Reuters, found that 40% of Americans approve of Biden's performance, while 55% of Americans do not approve of Joe Biden's job performance. Taking office in January 2021, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, Biden's term has been marked by the economic scars of the global health crisis, including soaring inflation. And the latest poll signals how about a third of Americans, including 1 in 5 Democrats and 2 in 5 Republicans, see the economy as the most important problem currently facing the country. The other issues concerning Americans are crime rates, the healthcare system, immigration, abortion rights, and inequality. Well, let's return to Susan in New York City to get more on this one. Not great news for President Biden here, Susan. Less than a month until the midterms. What does this all mean for the Democratic Party?
Definitely not good news. I mean, the Democratic Party, or the party in power, I guess, in general, around the midterms really are the underdogs. But these kind of numbers really signal that President Biden is in trouble himself. The Democrats are, for the most part, doing a lot better than many anticipated, at least according to polls in the midterms right now in many states. Some attribute that to the fact that more Democrats respond to polls, and because Democrats are spending a lot more in their campaigns. But on the other hand, as you mentioned, the issue of abortion and equality in some states have managed to garner support and bypass the issue of inflation and crime for the most part. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, we see among independents and Republicans and most Democrats that aren't really responding to polls, but are talking to their neighbors, or they're talking to, for example, others. They're saying that, putting food on their table or pumping gas into their cars, those are issues that they're going to be focusing on the most. So we'll have to wait and see ultimately, whether or not these numbers will really translate into people's votes at the ballot box, or they're not going to have an effect. But it's pretty likely that the Democrats are going to be in trouble, and President Biden will have to take a hard look at the way that he's been managing the situation right now. And a lot of it, many believe, has to do with the fact that he wasn't able to bring the country together. He really was supposed to unite the country where he's been dividing it. And I think there is a sense of exhaustion regarding that. And we see that in polling as well.
Susan, thank you. That was Susan Turani joining us live from New York City. The former representative of Hawaii and once a presidential candidate, Tulsi Gabbard, has announced that she's leaving the Democratic Party. In a harshly worded video, the former lawmaker said that instead of working for the people, the Democrats now stand for a government of, by and for the powerful elite. Let us first listen in to her statement.
I can no longer remain in today's Democratic Party that's under the complete control of an elitist cabal of warmongers who are driven by cowardly wokeness, who divide us by racializing every issue and stoking anti-white racism, who actively work to undermine our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in our Constitution, who are hostile to people of faith and spirituality, who demonize the police but protect criminals at the expense of law-abiding Americans, who believe in open borders, who weaponize the national security state to go after their political opponents, and above all, who are dragging us ever closer to nuclear war.
Gabbard further went on to call on her fellow Democrats to join her in leaving the party. However, she has not announced any plans regarding her new political associations or whether she's joining the Republican Party. Gabbard's resignation from the Democratic Party comes amid deep polarization between America's two major political parties, all of that ahead of the crucial midterm polls next month. Gabbard has been a frequent critic of the Biden administration. She's even blasted Biden's handling of Russia's war on Ukraine. Gabbard has been affiliated with the Democratic Party for the last 2 decades. She also represented Hawaii's 2nd congressional district from the years 2013 to 2021. In 2020, the Iraq War veteran made an unsuccessful bid for the White House. Well, next today, it's been a long time since women started working alongside men, but the journey hasn't always been easy. There's still a gender pay gap and a difficult work-life balance, and in some industries there are also pregnancy discriminations. Singapore Airlines, after years of criticism, now says it'll allow female cabin crew members to keep their jobs after pregnancy. Instead of flying, though, they'll be offered ground attachment duties. Most private airline companies follow a similar norm. However, according to a report in the newspaper The Straits Times, at Singapore Air, the placement isn't guaranteed, and authorities say that it depends on vacancies. The newspaper reported before, when women cabin crew disclosed their pregnancy, they were put on leave without pay. Gender equality groups called it discriminatory and unfair. Singapore Airlines, in a statement to AFP's news agency, said that pregnant cabin crew can now apply to work in a temporary ground position for 3 to 9 months after declaring their pregnancy. Well, to get more on this, we're joined by Annie Divya, the pilot and world's youngest commander of B777, joining us live from San Francisco. Thanks for being with us on today's programme. This practice by Singapore Airlines, it's been in place since 2010. Why the change now?
I think we should all appreciate the changes which are happening. Their subsidiary airlines have been taking women otherwise, like Silk Air and Scoot Airline have been taking women. Now, Singapore considering taking women pilots is an amazing step forward. Instead of questioning why it has not been done, I think I'm very happy. It's a great airline to work with, and it's always been in the one of the top airlines. So it's nice that they've come up with this, and I hope to see more women. There are about 5% of women there in their subsidiary airlines, so let's hope that we see more women around all the airlines in the world. Hoping to see that. I would be waiting for airlines like this for more women.
And where do you think things will go from here? You spoke there about the possibility of this change also impacting other airlines. Is that something that you think we're likely to see going forward?
Absolutely, because all the younger women who would want to come into aviation, they definitely look up to all these bigger airlines taking them in as career opportunities. So once these offers come out, there'll be more women who would like to join aviation and apply for these airlines and work harder and work better. Also, opening opportunities in different countries is something we're really looking forward to. Not only in Singapore, but there are other airlines where the women percentage in the world as women pilots, commercial pilots, is very less. So an airline like the Singapore airline, being a very big airline, taking that step will inspire many other places in the world to open up opportunities for women. So hopefully worldwide we'll have more percentage of women coming into aviation with this.
Annie Divya, thank you very much for your time on today's show. Hollywood actor Leonardo DiCaprio recently spoke against China and its deep-sea fishing industry. In late September, while sharing a news article regarding the same issue, DiCaprio wrote on Twitter, "The past 2 decades have seen China build its deep-sea fishing fleet into the thousands." He also stated that the Chinese fishermen have sailed to other oceans across the world to continue deep-sea fishing. Responding to the article, Chinese state-owned Global Times wrote that the article was biased and urged Leonardo DiCaprio to respect facts and stop talking recklessly. The Global Times is considered to be part of the Chinese Communist Party's propaganda arm. DiCaprio has long been a promoter of awareness regarding the climate crisis, also sustainable development and other related issues. DiCaprio also regularly makes donations to charities working in the fields of environment and conservation. And recently he's spoken about industries that are damaging ecosystems, things like fracking and the palm oil industry in Indonesia. The US space agency NASA has carried out a first-of-its-kind asteroid-altering mission. That happened last month, and the aim of the trial was to test Earth's ability to alter the orbit of an incoming asteroid. Now, NASA has confirmed that that test was successful. Here's a report.
Last month's suicide test flight of the DART spacecraft did succeed in nudging an asteroid out of its natural orbit through sheer kinetic force. All right. That's according to NASA on Tuesday, confirming that the test on September 26th marked the first time humanity altered the motion of a celestial body. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson.
Now, this is a watershed moment for planetary defense and a watershed moment for humanity.
The target of the Double Asteroid Redirection Test Flight, or DART, was an egg-shaped asteroid named Dimorphos, roughly the size of a football stadium. It was orbiting a larger parent asteroid called Didymos once every 11 hours and 55 minutes. The aim was to fly the DART impactor vehicle, no bigger than a vending machine, directly into Dimorphos at about 14,000 miles per hour, creating enough force to shift the moonlet's orbital track closer to its larger companion.
And now the team has confirmed that the spacecraft's impact altered the amorphous orbit around Didymos by 32 minutes and therefore successfully moved its trajectory. In other words, DART shortened the 11-hour and 55-minute orbit to 11 hours and 23 minutes. And it moved it in another location. And that has been confirmed by the telescopes.
And liftoff.
The $330 million proof-of-concept DART mission, which took 7 years to develop, also marked the world's first test of a planetary defense system designed to prevent a potential doomsday meteorite collision with Earth. Although NASA stressed the two asteroids nor DART posed any threat to Earth.
A landmark judgment in the United States is being brought to the big screens. A movie called Till is going to narrate the murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till that took place back in 1955. Here's a report.
He just wanted to go on vacation and have fun with his cousins.
A landmark case in the American civil rights movement is headed to the big screen. Based on true events, the film Till focuses on a 14-year-old black boy named Emmett Till who was abducted, tortured, and lynched after allegedly whistling at a white woman at the grocery store in Mississippi in 1955. But the story of Till's brutal murder and the acquittal of his killers is taking a somewhat different angle in the hands of director Chinonye Chukwu.
So this is not a story about the physical violence that was inflicted upon Emmett. This is a story about the woman who is responsible for the world knowing who Emmett Till even was. And so that will be the first thing that I will say. And it's also a story that's a love story between Mamie and her son, and and the joy and the humanity that also existed within them and between them as well.
It's hard to describe what a mother knows.
Actor Danielle Deadweiler portrays Till's mother, Mamie, who allowed for an open casket for her son's memorial so the world could see the aftermath of excessive violence against her son.
We have to maintain an understanding that this is a human being with a deeply urgent and tragic human experience that is still manifesting today in the guise of other people losing, other Black folks, families losing their daughters, sons to a very, very similar kind of thing.
What's wrong, Mamie?
We've never been apart this long.
While the story of Till is well known for its impact on the American civil rights movement, Whoopi Goldberg, a producer of the film, who also plays Mamie's mother and Emmett's grandmother, said she doesn't want the story to fade.
We see the same thing slipping towards us. We see that people say, no, we don't need to include LGBTQ history in a book. We don't need to include Black history in a book. We don't need to include Asian history in the book. We don't need to do any of that. Well, actually, you do. You do.
Till hits theaters in the U.S. on October 14th.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back again same time tomorrow. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. Hope to see you tomorrow.
Many other